In the midst of the opioid epidemic, it may be hard to believe that there's any reason to feel hopeful. Tonight, we'll share what one center is doing in response to this epidemic. The best news, the center is right here in Duluth, snowy Duluth, Minnesota. From opioid addiction to hope through recovery. Next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. The opioid epidemic has received a lot of media attention recently, with grim statistics which translate on a human level to far too many stories of loss and tragedy. And while it's important to understand the scope of the problem, it's equally important to get the word out that opioid addiction is treatable, and we have innovative, effective treatments right here in Duluth. I have two treatment innovators with us tonight, so if you have questions about opioid addiction, call them in now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. We'll be answering your questions throughout tonight's show. Joining me now is Gary Olson, the CEO of the Center for Alcohol and Drug Treatment, and also from the Center for Alcohol and Drug Treatment, Julie Seitz, CADT's Clinical Director. Thanks to both of you. I'm so glad that you made it here, and I'm glad that I made it here. Got my husband's four-wheel drive truck, and I was in the big red truck making it up here. I think what we do want to start maybe a little bit about scope, and I had read that the CDC came out with a report that in 2016, over 64,000 Americans died from opioid overdose, which was more Americans than were killed in the Vietnam War, to give you some perspective of that kind of scope. And Gary, tell us, we'll start with you, about just why so many people are dying from opioid overdose.
Well, I think, unlike other addictions, and we can't forget alcohol, which kills about 88,000 people a year, every year, and has forever. So it's not as if this is the only big drug problem that we have. Alcohol is a drug, of course, but the margin of error in opioid use and abuse is much narrower. And so with alcohol, or other drugs, it causes self-harm and harm to the family, but being fatal is something that kind of is much more the issue with opioids, and it's probably because of the margin of error. And as people become dependent and their tolerance increases, and they're using more and more, the difference between too much is very, very small. So if you're taking a small amount of opioids and you take twice as much, if you're on a small dose, it won't kill you. Whereas if you're on a high dose and you take just a little bit more, it can result in a fatal overdose.
And they're also, it's being complicated now by the fact that heroin is also being cut with fentanyl. Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit about why that's just an even more lethal combination.
Well, anytime, well, first of all, you just don't know how much fentanyl or other what other things are being cut into it. So that, of course, complicates it. So it's unregulated, it's dangerous in that manner. But when you are combining the two different opioids, it has just that greater impact on it, and that margin of error becomes even slimmer.
And so what we see, and kind of what you were talking about, Gary, is that although people do die, obviously, from alcohol addiction, that's usually a much slower process over a much longer period of time.
It's much more like obesity in that way, and that the medical problems add up over time, other than accidents and violence and those kind of things that are also associated with alcohol. But yeah, it's over time. And of course, what we're seeing now is the people that are overdosing are young people in the prime of their life, early. As Julie said, I think the big problem with the illicit drug, whether it's illicit pharmaceuticals or anything else, is you don't know what you're getting. you're rolling the dice. And so, you don't know what the purity is. You don't know what the dosing strength is. So it's unregulated, unsupervised, and very, very risky.
What are the, I think that there's this idea that that opioid addiction needs to be treated somewhat differently than other addictions. Julie, can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think there's this belief that, there are a multitude of ways that people can find recovery from opioid addiction, but there are some beliefs about certain modalities and treatment availabilities that become sort of stigmatized, such as medication-assisted treatment, which is a validated, empirically tested, and evidence-based practice. And so to get into the different modalities and the different types of treatment, I think people have this sense that there sometimes is a sense of loss of hope that there's anything out there, or that anything's helpful. And we're here to say that that's quite the opposite. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in recovery from opioid addiction, and there's many pathways to recovery. And I think that's something that we emphasize quite a bit, is the different pathways to recovery.
But the addiction is addiction. And so in Minnesota, we've always recognized that we're looking at the underlying condition. And of course, that's really obscured by the particular choice. But we have, alcohol addiction, we have gambling addiction, we have opioid addiction, we have methamphetamine addiction. And, one of the things we don't understand, because addiction is a very complex subject. And one of the things we don't understand is why people become addicted to substance A but not substance B. But then there are people that become, have an addiction problem with a particular substance, get into recovery from that, and then find themselves addicted to something else. Because addiction is a very natural it's a part of the human biology that a certain percentage of people are vulnerable to develop addictive behavior around specific things. And we don't fully understand that. But it's that process is a very natural biological process. It's not, it's not that highly variable. So the treatment approach might be slightly different, but only because we don't have those options sometimes for other things. I mean, when methadone, for example, was first introduced in the 50s by Dr. Vincent Dole, who was on the board of trustees of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson himself asked for something like that for alcohol. We don't have anything like that for alcohol. The methadone for alcoholics is alcohol, and so there's other strategies. But what in this case, what becomes the primary focus, like battlefield medicine, is keeping people alive long enough for them to develop the skills they need to move into recovery, and that's kind of what it's all about.
I think that's a wonderful analogy that you just made, the battlefield medicine.
Right.
And in battlefield medicine, they talk about the golden hour, which is you have 60 minutes that determines the life of a person or the death of a person, and that's really what we're dealing with here. One of the things that I've thought about the medication assisted, and I really want to talk about the medication assisted treatment, MAT, because I think that there are a lot of people out there who think that something like methadone, and there's more than just methadone, we can talk about the differences, but methadone, aren't you just replacing one drug with another, and aren't you just encouraging and reinforcing the addiction? Julie, can you speak to that?
Right, and there is a lot of that, and I think what we want to be able to say to that is that with methadone and the other medications that we use are Subutex, buprenorphine-based medications, Subutex and Suboxone, and you will develop a physical dependence, but the addictive behaviors, the addiction the symptoms are ceasing. Right. And so what I think the big thing we want to talk about is that although the medicine might in fact be someone becomes dependent on it, the behaviors of addiction are no longer there. And I think that's key to all of this. I mean, we look at this in such a black and white way in some ways, that a drug is a drug is a drug, when the truth of the matter is what we are often being discontented by are the behaviors and the other symptoms of addiction, not necessarily the drug itself, right? And so when we find people on MAT, whether it's methadone or Suboxone, a lot of those behaviors actually subside.
And the damage.
The damage, the collateral damage, indeed.
You know, we just don't have something, I mean, if there was something like that, for example, for alcohol, and so somebody could drink without getting drunk or drunk driving, we would feel differently about that, I think. And I think it would be difficult for people to say that wasn't the good idea, because it eliminates a lot of these collateral damage and the addictive behavior. So it's a stabilization thing. But we also have many people that we work with whose goal is to get off all opioids, and this is a pathway to do that. So we're not saying that people need to be on a medication-assisted regimen forever.
And that was going to be my next question. Although I want to backtrack a little bit, because just to make this crystal clear for our viewing audience, is that also when you're saying that they don't, people who are on methadone, and especially the right dose of methadone, are not engaging in addictive behaviors, and they're not high in the traditional sense, and are able to be more functional, including being able to do things like function at school or function on the job. Am I correct about that?
You are, but you know, people can be stable on medication-assisted treatment and still abusing other drugs. And so the people we're working with, I mean, you know, many of them are professionals, they're employed, they're doing very well because this has stabilized them. It's like an antidepressant. They're functioning like in their normal way, normal life. But other people that are still struggling with other addictions, and this is only helping keep people alive as we work with them on the other addictions and the underlying issues that are related to that. So, you know, there isn't one silver bullet. There is no one size fits all. Every person that comes through the door has a different history, a different set of strengths and vulnerabilities, and you know, we call our treatment collaborative because at the end of the day, it's the person, I don't care what the drug is, it's the person that does the work of recovery, which is a long-term proposition.
And so that's where Gary was saying, Julie, that there are people who go on medication-assisted treatment, and they may stay on that treatment for a long period of time, and others are using that as a stepping stone towards absolute sobriety then. Absolutely.
I think some things to think about, you know, when you look at the national averages, the average length of time of someone on a medication-assisted treatment regimen is about 2.5 years. But that said, that doesn't mean that we don't have folks that are on medication-assisted treatment for 10, 15 years, and some that have been even less than that. So I think it just is, it's highly individualized, and it's really based on the needs, and it's sometimes it's a long-term plan, and sometimes it's a stepping stone to a different treatment plan.
Here's a question that came in, Gary. A man from Duluth called in, said that a friend overcame addiction to opioids by decreasing Suboxone, and if I understand the question correctly, sort of replaced that with intense exercise. And I think, and the question is, do you recommend this? And does that sound like a pathway to recovery for you?
Well,
not
I think
for you, but to you.
There's one researcher, George Valent from Harvard, that did a 40-year study of both people with alcoholism and people with opioid dependency, and people that got into recovery and people that went in and out of this condition into recovery. And what he concluded was that most people with an addiction ultimately find some kind of replacement for that addiction. So what we hope is that that's not another addictive thing. And you know, I love exercise. A lot of people don't, but I do. And I can tell you that exercise can become addictive, and you can continue to exercise despite harmful consequences, which is the definition of addiction. So people even can become addicted to positive, what would start out as positive things, because once the mechanism's in place, because it's very rewarding. I mean, opioids, exercise, and alcohol all produce endogenous opioids in the brain. So really what makes you feel good when you drink is opioids. It's not alcohol. Alcohol triggers the endogenous opioids. So you know, it's the pattern of behavior. You can't really call one thing, you know, addiction until you see the evidence of that continued use despite negative consequences.
You know, and I often talk with the clients who I see who have co-occurring disorders about, you know, the fundamental question that we need you to be able to answer and you to get a grip on is how much is enough.
Right.
You know, so that you're not going into doing the shape shifting away from and substituting one thing for another thing and doing it in a way that is as equally harmful to you or harmful in the long run to
and
you.
you've kind of defined recovery in my estimation. Julie might have another view of it, but you know, I always talk about the difference between abstinence, sobriety, and recovery is that abstinence is just a physiological condition. You're not using substance A. Sobriety is a commitment to that abstinence. So you're making a commitment to remain abstinent. But recovery is really something more than that. It's dealing with exactly what you're talking about, which is how do you live a life where you begin to identify those things that are patterns of behavior that are leading you to excess or leading you into self-harm or harming, you know, whatever kind of harm. It always starts with self-harm, really, isn't it? I mean, addiction, that's always the first person that suffers is the person who's using. So, yeah.
So, Julie, you said that, you know, one of the main goals is like, we want to keep you alive long enough so that we can get you to recovery.
Right.
And one of the things that the center has done most recently is this really innovative program. I know it by its old name, but I think its new name is Pathfinders.
It is.
Okay, so I remember that correctly because it's like I've got OMO, the opioid management and withdrawal unit. And so tell us about this innovative step bridge into treatment. That's how I think of it, and I may be thinking of it wrongly.
I don't think you are. So it's Pathfinder, and it is an opiate withdrawal management unit, hence the silly acronym that we once had. But it is innovative. It is a first of its kind, at least in the state of Minnesota, and we even looked nationally at a model after it and didn't find much out there. But it is a rapid access detoxification unit specific for opiate withdrawal management. And so we're able to, it's a small unit, it's 6 beds, and it's co-ed, and we're able to bring people in who are in opioid withdrawal, and treat them. Usually we use buprenorphine products upstairs. And what we're able to do is have comprehensive assessment, case management, treatment planning that happens right then and there. And then we're bridging or path finding for our clients an appropriate treatment plan. And those treatment plans really do vary. I mean, you know, we have been actively taking clients for a little over a month now, and we have had about as many different treatment plans as we have patients. So,
and just to another feature at this point, this is grant funded.
Right.
So
Right.
we have a federal grant, significant help from St. Louis County and the 6th District Court, and so for people in our region, there is no cost to come in. And
Right.
I hesitate to say that because we can't handle like 50 people showing up tomorrow morning, but what we're trying to do is lower that barrier to entry so we can get people in, stabilize them, keep them safe in a safe environment while we figure out what the next step is. You know, getting the prior authorizations from insurance companies, getting the comprehensive assessment, figuring out what level of care is appropriate, because some people need not just medication, they need residential treatment or outpatient treatment, psychosocial treatment. We're a treatment program, we're not a dosing program. So the medication is really just part of what we do, including at ClearPath Clinic, which is the downstairs from the withdrawal management unit, but we can get people there, stabilize, and actually start them on medication at the clinic, and then they can immediately follow. So it's not like go to, you know, this other place to get help. The help is continuous. There's a warm handoff.
Warm handoff.
Yeah.
How do people access?
So it is based on referral at this point, and so they're going to contact us at our main line and ask for the Pathfinder or the opiate withdrawal unit, and then they're patched through to me or the primary provider of the unit, and we usually go through a series of criteria. We really want to know that they are experiencing withdrawal symptoms or that they are at risk for withdrawal. They may have recently used and might be at risk for withdrawal, and that they are really genuinely interested in treatment. That's the other part of all this, is that's a big caveat. You want to be interested in treatment because we want to bridge you or pathway you to that plan.
And one of the things, one of the things that we hear about a lot is women who are pregnant, who are addicted to opioids. And what are the resources available for them? And is that one of the resources available?
It is certainly one of the resources. In fact, we've been targeting pregnant women for a number of years. They have priority admission into any one of our programs for a number of reasons. But withdrawal from opiates actually is dangerous to the unborn child. And so what we will do is help get people in. They will have priority admission, particularly pregnant women, and then we will coordinate with their, or if they aren't receiving services, we'll get them connected with services. We have programs down in our Clear Path, which is our opiate treatment program downstairs. We have programs down there where we are collaborating with the OBGYNs, and they actually have clinic hours down there. So we're starting Essentia's, OBGYN, and so we're trying to bridge just the disconnect in services and take away the stigma and the fear and really instilling hope that people can find recovery.
And I think it's really important to say, to add on to that, is that, for the viewing audience who's saying, what do you mean that you've got women on methadone or some other medically assisted treatment, medication assisted treatment, but the research indicates that that newborns and the fetus growing inside is really pretty safe with the methadone, and I think that's like counterintuitive to what we might believe.
It is, but I'll tell you what, the key is getting people in early, and the problem has been women that show up to deliver a baby that have an opioid dependency, an illicit or unrecognized or undiagnosed opioid dependency. And the doctor and the hospital doesn't even know this. And so the consequences of that, along with all the other problems that might be associated with it, are one thing. But if you can get women in early and stabilize on medication, which everyone agrees that we have to do to help the mother and the unborn child. And so getting them in early and keeping them, our experience is when they do deliver, the problems are far less severe. I just want to mention, by the way, there's no such thing as an addicted baby. Addiction is a description of a behavior. There are babies who have neonatal abstinence syndrome, but that's based on a dependency, but that's not addiction. And so it's really an extra stigmatizing thing to talk about addicted babies. And I've been on a mission to exterminate that from our language.
I think there might be some women out there, Julie, who would be thinking, like, if I were to access care with this addiction, I would be in trouble, and they would take my baby away from me.
I can appreciate that fear. And so how I would respond to that is more complex. It's a genuine fear. However, we will work with the woman and the systems. We, as mandated reporters, we have to usually make a mandated report. We can't. Regulations and licensure don't prevent that. However, what we have found in most cases, that the agencies that we're required to report to are more than willing to work with all of us. And in most cases, women are having very healthy pregnancies till the end and giving birth to healthy babies.
Well, and what I always say is that people are not, they're not punished for seeking help.
That's right.
Correct.
So when social services knows that you are getting the help that you need and that you're doing everything that you can, they want to do everything to keep you as a family intact.
That's exactly
It's when you're not doing those things and you're potentially bringing harm to a child. And I think that's the most important thing. We're getting close to running out of time. So Gary, what would your message of hope be to the viewing audience?
Well, I've been in this business for a long time.
Yes, you have.
And I think, long term, if people can survive their addiction, and outlive their addiction, most people with addictions eventually do recover if they can stay alive, one way or the other. maybe multiple treatments. It may not be right after treatment, it might be 6 months after treatment. So long term, I think everything points to recovery as the more natural progression. People kind of mature out of it. So just that alone is should be a hopeful sign. So we're always supporting that every step of the way.
And their slogan is that they don't quit until you are ready to quit.
Yeah.
I love that as a little tagline. So here's the number one thing: people with addictions aren't weak. They have an illness. There are many, many wonderful treatments out there. One of the things that you heard a lot about today is that actually if you have an opioid addiction, you have many, many options, and in some ways, maybe even more options than some of the other addictions that we treat. So there's actually a lot of good news out there. And we have a wonderful center. Thanks so much for the Center for Alcohol and Drug Treatment of sharing their time with us today. And thanks so much to you to joining the discussion. Don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links. And join us next week when we'll be talking about reducing anxiety through the chemistry of calm. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Production of Speak Your Mind is sponsored by